The world is watching a high-stakes drama unfold between the United States and China. At the center, Russian oil. Washington demands the world, especially China, stop buying Russian oil to isolate Moscow and cripple its economy. The US frames this as a moral and strategic imperative, cutting off funds that fuel conflict. But China's answer is simple: no. This defiance signals a new, dangerous phase in global politics. For the US, it's about upholding international order and punishing aggression. For China, it's about energy security, keeping its economy running and lights on. Beijing sees US demands as interference in its sovereignty and an attempt to slow its rise. The tension is clear in stern statements from Washington and defiant rebuttals from Beijing. This is more than diplomacy, it's a power play. The US leverages its financial system, China leverages its market and partnership with Russia. The standoff over Russian oil is a symbol of a larger struggle for dominance in the 21st century. Other nations are being forced to choose sides. Allies in Europe and Asia face pressure to follow Washington, while energy-dependent countries watch China's defiance. The world is splitting into economic blocs centered around Washington and Beijing. This is a new kind of Cold War, fought with sanctions, tariffs, and economic coercion. The first battlefield, the global energy market. The choices made now will shape the world for decades. From policymakers in Washington to factory workers in Guangzhou, everyone will feel the impact. The contest over oil is just the beginning of a much larger global realignment. China's position is rooted in its massive need for energy. As the world's largest oil importer, China's economy depends on a steady flow of crude. Any disruption could threaten economic and political stability. That's why Beijing has spent decades diversifying energy sources. Russia, with its shared border and pipelines, is now China's most crucial supplier. Overland pipelines like the Eastern Siberia-Pacific Ocean route offer security that sea routes cannot. China's imports of Russian oil have surged to over 1.5 million barrels per day, making Russia its top supplier. The trade is mutually beneficial. Russia gains a vital market, China gets reliable, often discounted energy. Buying Russian oil gives Chinese refiners a competitive edge and helps control inflation. This partnership is about more than economics. It's a strategic alignment against US pressure. By strengthening energy ties, China and Russia are building an economic bloc resilient to American sanctions. They're creating alternative trade and finance systems outside US control. Every barrel China buys is a political statement. It won't bow to US demands. The energy alliance signals China's commitment to a multipolar world. The oil trade is both a shield and a sword in the contest for global influence. The US sees every barrel of Russian oil as funding for Moscow's military ambitions. To stop this, Washington leads a coalition imposing severe sanctions on Russia. The goal: isolate Russia from global finance and cripple its energy exports. The US uses its dominance over the dollar and banking system to enforce these measures. Transactions in dollars for Russian oil are nearly impossible. Shipping, insurance, and logistics companies face threats of being cut off from the US market if they help Russia. Tariffs are another tool, used to punish countries like China that undermine US policy. The message: do business with Russia and you risk losing access to the American market. But sanctioning China is far more complex than targeting smaller nations. A full-blown economic conflict would devastate global supply chains and markets. Washington must balance pressure with the risk of economic catastrophe. The strategy is a high-stakes gamble with no guaranteed outcome. The US wants to change Beijing's behavior without triggering a global economic crisis. The world watches as the US tests the limits of its economic power. The effectiveness and risks of sanctions are now on full display. China's response to US pressure is unwavering. Beijing insists its energy policy is a sovereign matter, not subject to outside interference. Officials argue their trade with Russia is normal economic cooperation. For China, energy security is non-negotiable. It underpins economic and political stability. A sudden loss of Russian oil would threaten growth and risk social unrest. Abandoning Russia to appease Washington would be self-destructive. China also fears that giving in now would set a precedent for future US pressure. Beijing suspects the real goal is to contain China's rise, not just punish Russia. By resisting, China asserts its independence and challenges US hegemony. The energy partnership with Russia is part of a broader push for a multipolar world. Trading in yuan and rubles chips away at dollar dominance. China's stance is both a shield for its interests and a challenge to the old global order. The US-China standoff over Russian oil hits home at the gas pump. Global oil is a single, interconnected market. Disruptions ripple worldwide. Western bans on Russian oil created a supply shock, driving prices up. China and India's purchases of Russian oil help keep global supply steady, capping price spikes. But sanctions have split the market, discounted Russian oil for some, higher prices for others. For Americans, sanctions mean higher gas prices and inflation. Ironically, China's defiance may help keep US prices from rising even more. The fractured market adds volatility and risk for everyone. Companies and countries now face constant uncertainty over sanctions and tariffs. Planning for the future is harder, and investment in energy is riskier. The standoff is a reminder: global politics directly affect daily life. The price at the pump is now set as much by geopolitics as by supply and demand. India, like China, is buying more Russian oil to meet its energy needs. For New Delhi, cheap oil is vital for economic growth and fighting inflation. But India is also a key US partner, complicating its position. India defends its purchases as a matter of national interest and strategic autonomy. The US is cautious in its criticism, wary of alienating a crucial ally. This highlights the double standard: what's condemned in rivals is tolerated in partners. India's balancing act shows how middle powers are carving out independent paths. The global order is shifting, and countries like India are shaping the new rules. The oil conflict is accelerating the reshaping of the global order. The US-led system is fracturing as new alliances form. China and Russia are building an alternative bloc, trading in their own currencies and bypassing Western systems. Their no-limits partnership is the biggest challenge to US power in decades. The US rallies allies, framing the struggle as democracy versus authoritarianism. But economic interests often override political alignments, as seen with China and India. Most countries in the global south avoid taking sides, focusing on development and affordable energy. Non-alignment is becoming a common strategy. The actions of these nations will help determine the shape of the new world order. The chessboard is set, but the outcome is far from certain. The world is entering an era of fragmented power and shifting alliances. The economic battle is matched by a fierce war of words. The US frames the issue as a moral struggle, urging nations to stand on the right side of history. American officials warn that siding with Russia will isolate China globally. The strategy: public shaming and strategic persuasion. China counters with its own narrative, accusing the US of hypocrisy and destabilizing the world. Chinese officials call for mutual respect and non-interference, appealing to the global south. The war of words reveals deep mistrust and little common ground. The US touts a rules-based order. China argues those rules serve Western interests. Beijing calls for new rules reflecting new powers. The diplomatic deadlock means compromise is unlikely. Both sides are entrenched, convinced of their cause. As long as this verbal battle rages, the economic standoff will continue. The world watches, anxious for resolution. The standoff over Russian oil marks the end of unchallenged US global leadership. China and India's refusal to bow to US pressure signals a new era of independent foreign policies. The global economy is fragmenting into competing blocs, one led by the US, the other by China and Russia. This shift brings higher costs, less efficiency, and more instability. The era of cheap, frictionless global trade may be ending. Geopolitical tensions will increasingly shape daily life, from gas prices to electronics. Nations face tough choices about alliances and partnerships. The risk of great power conflict is rising. The choices made today are drawing the map of a contentious new world. The US-China oil showdown is a symptom of a larger historical transition. The world has changed, and the contest over oil is just the beginning.